My family called me ugly at my own graduation and buried me like I never existed. 11 years later, I walked into my sister's wedding, and her groom asked the one question that destroyed her in front of everyone. When the groom turned around at his own wedding and said my name, not to Sloane, not to anyone else, but to me across a vineyard full of 200 guests, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in 11 years. Seen. Not pitied, not dismissed, not measured against my sister's cheekbones and found wanting. Just seen by a man who had no idea he was about to detonate every lie my family had spent a decade carefully building around my absence. I need to back up, because the wedding, the look on my mother's face, the way Sloane's fingers turned white around Nathan's arm, and the single word Nathan asked my father that made the entire vineyard go silent, none of it makes sense without the party that started everything. The celebration that was supposed to be about me, but never really was. I was 18 years old, standing in my parents' backyard in a blue dress I had bought from the clearance rack at Target for $14.99. I remember the price because I had saved up for it myself, bagging groceries at the Kroger on Westerville Road since I was 16. I remember every detail of that afternoon, the way you remember a car accident, with a strange, crystalline clarity, your brain refusing to let you forget even the pieces you would give anything to lose. I had just received a full academic scholarship to Ohio State, a full ride, not a loan, not a partial grant, but every dollar covered, plus a small stipend for books. The letter had arrived 3 days earlier, and I had read it probably 40 times, touching the raised university seal like it was something holy. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Oakes, who had spent 22 years in public education and still remembered every student's name at every reunion, had called the house personally. She told my mother it was one of the strongest applications she had ever seen come out of our district. My mother said, "How nice." Then she started planning the party. I told myself the party was a good sign. I told myself that maybe, finally, I was going to get the version of my parents that other kids seemed to have. The proud ones. The ones who framed things, cried at ceremonies, and embarrassed you by telling strangers in grocery stores about your GPA. I wanted that so badly that I had convinced myself I already had it. So, I stood there in that clearance rack dress with the scholarship letter folded in my cardigan pocket, watching my mother arrange fruit skewers on a table decorated with balloons that said, "Congratulations." She had not asked what my favorite color was when she bought the balloons. They were pink. Sloane's favorite color was pink. I told myself that was nothing. The backyard began filling up around 4 in the afternoon. Cousins I barely spoke to, aunts who smelled like Chanel and cigarettes, neighbors who had watched me grow up quiet and studious and slightly invisible, my father's work friends, my mother's book club, all of them eating the food my mother had spent 2 days preparing, and she really was a wonderful cook. I will give her that. Everyone chatted and laughed and moved around me like I was a piece of furniture that had been rearranged without anyone asking the room. Sloane circulated through that party like she had been born for it. She was 16, already 5'8", with the kind of effortless honey blonde beauty that made adults say things like, "You should be a model," and mean it as a compliment instead of a dismissal. She had hugged me when I arrived and said, "Congrats, hon." And for maybe 90 seconds, I felt genuinely warm about it. Then I noticed she was wearing a new sundress my mother had clearly bought her for the occasion. No one had offered to buy me a dress. I told myself that was nothing too. Then my mother looked at me, really looked at me the way she did sometimes, like she was performing a quiet inventory, and sighed. Not a tired sigh, a disappointed one. The kind that came with the faint curl of something like regret. "At least she's smart," she said to my Aunt Deborah, loud enough for the closest cluster of people to hear. God knows beauty skipped her. My father laughed into his beer. Sloane tilted her head to one side. She was 16 years old, and she had already learned how to land a knife with a smile. "You look like somebody's substitute teacher," she said. The backyard laughed. Not all of it. There were people who looked away, people who studied their plates, people who suddenly found something very interesting happening near the punch bowl, but enough of them laughed. Enough that the sound hit me like something physical, like a wave I had not seen coming. I stood there in my $14.99 clearance dress, holding a scholarship letter that represented 4 years of 4 a.m., study sessions, and every extracurricular I had stuffed onto an application, and I thought, this is the celebration. I heard my own voice come out quiet and steady in a way I had not planned. "Why would you say that?" My mother's smile did not disappear so much as retract, like a blade sliding back into a handle. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "We're joking." It was never a joke when I was the punchline. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because the version of this story my family told for years involved a lot of my crying, my instability, my sensitivity. I did not cry. I smiled at a few relatives, ate half a plate of food, watched candles get lit on a cake that said Hannah in blue icing, and thought with strange calm, I am leaving in 2 weeks, and I do not think I am coming back. I left 2 weeks later with 2 suitcases and $312 from my Kroger job, held together with a rubber band at the bottom of my backpack. My roommate at OSU was a girl from Cleveland named Bridget, who talked in her sleep, made excellent ramen, and became, over 4 years, my first real evidence that chosen family was a thing that actually existed. My parents did not drive me. My mother said they had already planned to take Sloan to look at dance programs that weekend. She said this like it was logistical rather than a choice. I took the bus. By Thanksgiving that year, my childhood bedroom had been converted into Sloan's beauty room, a walk-in vanity setup complete with a ring light and a new mirror my parents had apparently driven 90 minutes to Cincinnati to purchase. I know this because my cousin Meredith, who possessed neither cruelty nor tact in enough quantity to stay quiet about things, texted me a photo with the caption, "Did you know about this?" I had not known. By Christmas, my name was missing from the family card. I found that out the same way. Meredith, who genuinely should have become a journalist, sent me a photo of the Whitaker family Christmas card featuring my parents, Sloan, and the family golden retriever, Biscuit, posed in front of a decorated tree. 4 subjects? Not 5. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I put my phone face down and went back to studying for finals. By the following summer, relatives had begun speaking about me in past tense. According to Meredith's increasingly detailed reporting, my Aunt Deborah told someone at a 4th of July gathering that Hannah had gone off to Columbus and just sort of disappeared from the family, as though I were fog, as though I had dissolved. So I stopped calling. I stopped texting on birthdays. I stopped sending cards I had spent real time choosing, only to receive nothing in return except, occasionally, a one-line reply from my father that felt like a form letter. I stopped begging for the version of them I had wanted, and I accepted, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has finally finished grieving something they were never going to get, that this was simply who they were. Then I moved forward. 11 years is a long time, long enough to finish undergrad in 3 years instead of 4, long enough to complete medical school at Case Western, where my advisor, Dr. Leonard Chu, chief of plastic and reconstructive surgery, 15 years as an attending, the most precise and demanding person I have ever worked for, and also the best, told me during my 3rd year that I had instincts that could not be taught. Long enough to complete my residency at Massachusetts General in Boston, and to specialize in reconstructive surgery. I spent my days rebuilding what fire, trauma, and accidents had destroyed. I put faces back together. I know that sounds dramatic, almost cinematic, but that was the work. Burn victims, blast injuries, accident survivors who had been told they would never look like themselves again. I performed the surgeries, worked through the complications, and sat with patients in recovery rooms at 11 at night when the fear hit hardest. I watched people look in mirrors for the first time after months of being afraid to, and I watched something come back into their eyes. I was good at it. By most professional measures, I was very good at it. I was 30 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Back Bay, with an excellent collection of medical journals and a small but fiercely loyal group of colleagues and friends, when the ivory envelope arrived. Sloan Whitaker and Nathan Reed requested the honor of my presence at their wedding. No note, no apology attached. No explanation for the 11-year gap between the last time my parents had included me in a Christmas card and this moment when my name had apparently been remembered and printed in clean embossed lettering on ivory stock. Just the invitation, the venue, a vineyard outside Columbus, the date, a Saturday in late September, and an RSVP card with a checkbox for salmon or chicken. I set it on my kitchen counter and did not touch it for 3 days. My colleague and closest friend, Dr. Amara Owe, a reconstructive fellow, 32, and the most emotionally intelligent person I had met in medicine, found it there when she came over Thursday evening. She picked it up, read it, and looked at me with the specific expression she reserved for situations she considered clinically interesting. "You're going," she said. "I haven't decided." "You're going," she said again, and poured us both a glass of wine. We talked about it for 4 hours. I explained the clearance rack dress, the backyard party, Meredith's texts, and the Christmas card with 4 subjects. I explained 11 years of silence that I had not, contrary to whatever version of events my family had been circulating, initiated. Amara listened the way she always did, completely, without filling in the silences and without performing empathy. When I finished, she sat for a moment and said, "You've spent 11 years becoming Dr. Hannah Whitaker. I think you should go remind them of that." So I RSVP'd for the salmon. I found the dress at a boutique in the South End. Emerald green, tailored at the waist, the kind of cut that required you to stand up straight and mean it. It cost more than my first month's rent in grad school. I bought it without deliberating, which for me, a person who had once spent 45 minutes in a Target checkout line deciding between 2 pairs of socks, was its own kind of statement. I drove to Columbus the Friday before the wedding and checked into a hotel downtown. I did not call my parents. That night, I lay in the hotel bed with the city noise filtering up through the window and felt something I could not immediately name. Not nervousness, not anticipation. Something older than that. Something that had lived in the back of my chest since a backyard party 11 years earlier. Quiet and patient, waiting for the moment it would finally get to speak. The vineyard was genuinely beautiful. Rolling hills in early autumn gold, a white tent strung with soft lights, round tables with centerpieces that probably cost more than my first college semester. I arrived precisely on time, alone, and walked in through the main entrance like I was walking into any other room. I am a surgeon. I have walked into operating theaters to perform procedures that carried real risk of serious complications, and I have been calm enough to make the first incision without my hands shaking. I could walk into a wedding. I felt my mother before I saw her, the way the air near her changed. I had been aware of it since childhood, some animal instinct trained by years of monitoring her moods for safety. I turned and found her standing 15 feet away with a smile that froze the instant her eyes reached my face. The smile did not disappear, it just stopped, like a clock that had been paused rather than turned off. Her hand, holding a champagne flute, went very still. My father stopped talking mid-sentence to the man beside him. His eyes moved over me with the particular expression of someone trying to reconcile two conflicting pieces of information. I gave them both a small, composed smile. Neither of them moved toward me. Neither of them said my name. I kept walking. I found a seat near the back, nodded to a cousin I vaguely recognized, and watched the room. It was the kind of crowd that announced money and effort. Women in serious dresses, men in suits that fit correctly, and an open bar already doing early business. Sloane had built, by all visible evidence, an excellent life. I felt nothing complicated about that. I had no interest in her unhappiness. I had simply come to be present, to be undeniable, to exist in a room that had once erased me. Then I saw Sloane being guided toward the entrance by a bridesmaid with a walkie-talkie, and she looked, honestly, stunning. She was 27 and had grown into exactly the person her 16-year-old self had promised to become. Perfect posture, radiant under her bridal makeup. The gown was extraordinary. She saw me from across the room, and the color left her face so completely and so suddenly that the bridesmaid reached for her arm. I held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked away. The ceremony was brief and tasteful. I watched from the back row, composed, hands folded in my lap. During the vows, I studied Nathan Reed, mid-30s, dark-haired, with the look of someone who built things, not metaphorically, but actually. There was something in the set of his shoulders, the quality of his stillness, that spoke of physical competence. He said his vows, looking directly at Sloane with an expression of genuine feeling. Whatever else was about to happen, he loved her, or at least the version of her he believed he was marrying. The reception was already in comfortable motion, cocktail hour winding down and guests moving toward the dinner tent, when I was standing near the edge of the terrace with a glass of sparkling water, watching the vineyards and the fading light. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Nathan Reed was walking toward me with the direct, purposeful movement of someone with a specific destination, and he was looking at me with an expression I recognized from hospital hallways, the particular look of someone trying to place a face in the wrong context. He stopped 6 feet away and stared. "Hannah," he said. Then, slowly, like a man watching something rearrange itself in real time, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me Sloane was your sister?" The terrace was not empty. There were a dozen guests close enough to hear, and the acoustics of open outdoor space are unkind to private conversations. Sloane appeared from somewhere to his left. She had been watching, I realized. Watching him cross the terrace toward me. She reached for his arm, her fingers pressing in. "You know her?" Nathan did not look at her immediately. He was still looking at me, and when he answered, his voice was quiet and careful, the voice of a man beginning to understand that several things were not what he had thought they were. "Dr. Whitaker saved my brother's face after the accident." The dinner tent was close enough that nearby guests heard. The conversations nearest to us did not stop so much as slow, then still, the way water goes quiet before something surfaces. I remembered him then. Not from this, not from Sloane, not from any family context, because my family had not mentioned my name to me and had apparently not mentioned his name to me either. I remembered him from a hospital hallway at Massachusetts General on a Tuesday night in February, 2 years earlier. His brother, Evan, had been brought in after an industrial accident at a manufacturing facility outside Worcester. A gas line rupture, an explosion, a man caught too close to it. The injuries were severe, the kind that make emergency responders go quiet, the kind that make intake nurses set their faces into professional neutrality while their eyes communicate something else. Evan Reed was 26 years old, and half his jaw had been destroyed. I remember Nathan standing outside the OR with blood, his brother's blood, still on his shirt because there had not been time to change. He had driven straight from the site. He stopped me in the hallway, not dramatically, not hysterically, but with the focused urgency of a man who had used up all his panic and arrived at something colder and more determined on the other side of it. He asked me quietly if his brother was going to be able to look like himself again. I did not make promises I could not keep. I told him we would do everything that could be done. We performed 6 surgeries over 14 months. I performed 4 of them. The 5th was handled by a specialist we brought in from Johns Hopkins for the mandibular reconstruction. The sixth was follow-up from my colleague, Dr. Priya Sharma, a reconstructive surgeon with 11 years as an attending, meticulous in a way that made our entire team better. By the end of it, Evan Reed could smile again. Not the smile he had before. Scars change topology. Nerve regeneration is imperfect, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. But it was a real smile. His own. Nathan had sent a card after the final surgical clearance, handwritten, 2 paragraphs, the kind of thing people write when they mean it and cannot find a way to say it that does not feel insufficient. I had kept it. I did not keep many things, but I had kept that. I had not known his last name was Reed, or maybe I had known it because of course it had been in the charts, but it had never connected to anything. Why would it? Sloan had never mentioned a Nathan, and my family apparently had not mentioned my name to anyone in their lives except as a cautionary tale. My family talks about you like you're a miracle, Nathan said. He said it simply, without performance, just as a fact. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a swallow and a word that failed to form. Sloan laughed the slightly too high laugh of a person trying to manage a situation and said, "That's funny. Hannah never mentioned knowing you." "I haven't spoken to Hannah in 11 years, my father said. He said it sharply, with the particular emphasis of a man who had told one version of a story so many times that guilt had calcified into something that sounded, from the outside, like moral authority. As though my absence were a condition I had created and imposed. As though the 11 years were mine to carry. Nathan turned to him slowly. "Why?" One word, no obvious judgment in it. Just the genuine, slightly baffled question of a man who had for 2 years heard the name Dr. Hannah Whitaker, spoken in his family's home with something close to reverence, and was now standing in front of her at his own wedding, discovering she had a family he had been told things about. My mother stepped in with the practiced smoothness of a woman who had spent decades managing social surfaces. "Families drift apart, Nathan. It's complicated." I looked at her and felt very calm. The kind of calm that is not peace, exactly, but is its close structural relative. The kind that comes from having had 11 years to stop expecting things. "Is that what we're calling it?" I said. Sloane's eyes went hard. "Don't start drama at my wedding." "I didn't start anything," I said. "Your fiancé asked a question." Nathan was quiet for a moment. He looked at my parents, then at Sloane, and his jaw tightened in a specific way. The same way it had in that hospital hallway when the panic had cleared and the focus had come in, when he decided to stay and deal with facts instead of collapsing under them. "You told me," he said to Sloane, "that your sister was unstable, that she cut the family off because she was jealous of you." The words hung in the air with the specific weight of something that had been said enough times to be believed. My chest clenched, but not with surprise. I had suspected something like this in the abstract, not with hurt exactly, because the wound was old enough to have scar tissue, but with a kind of recognition. There it was, the working narrative. The explanation that had circulated through 11 years of relatives speaking about me in past tense. Cousins receiving the sanitized version of a family that had erased me and needed a reason why. Hannah was unstable. Hannah was jealous. Hannah left because she was bitter. Not, we failed her at her own celebration. Not, we removed her name from Christmas cards. Not, we converted her bedroom before she finished her first semester. Hannah. My mother moved toward Nathan with the expression she wore at difficult dinner parties. Warm, reasonable, privately furious. "This really isn't the time, I think," Nathan said, and his voice had gone very quiet, which in my experience is never the voice of a calm person, but is often the voice of a controlled one. "This is exactly the time. Because the woman you described as bitter and broken is the person my brother credits with giving him his life back." Whispers moved through the guests near the terrace. Not the titillated kind. Something more uncomfortable than that, the kind that happens when people are witnessing something real and do not know where to put their eyes. Sloane's smile cracked. Not all at once, but in stages. Like a structure taking on stress. Each point of failure visible before the next one gives. She was 27 years old and had been, for her entire life, the one who came out ahead, the one the room oriented toward. The one my parents framed and praised and centered while I stood slightly to the left of the frame, holding a scholarship letter no one asked to read. A woman in the front row of the nearest guest cluster stood up. I had not noticed her during the ceremony. Silver-haired, straight-backed, dressed with the specific quiet elegance of someone who does not need to announce herself. She stood with the unhurried certainty of a person accustomed to being listened to when she speaks. Marianne Reed, Nathan's mother. She looked directly at Sloane. "You told me," she said, with the particular evenness of someone delivering information rather than accusation, that Hannah refused family events because she believed she was too successful for everyone, that she had made it clear she wanted distance. Sloane's face, in that moment, did something I do not have precise language for. Crumbled is not quite right. She did not fall apart. It was more like the scaffolding became visible, like the structure beneath the performance was suddenly legible. She said, "I didn't know Nathan knew her." Not, "That isn't true." Not, "I'm sorry." Not even the deflection of, "It's complicated. Families drift." Only the specific confession of someone caught. "I did not know I would get caught." Nathan took one step backward. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just one step, slow and deliberate. The inch of physical space that communicates a recalibration away from Sloane, toward something else, or maybe toward nothing yet, but unmistakably away. Sloane, he said, still quietly. I need to know who I'm marrying. 200 guests, the vineyard light going golden and long in the late afternoon, a wedding cake somewhere inside that had not been cut yet. And the look on my sister's face told every single person watching that she did not have an answer that could save her. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because the version of this story that satisfies people most cleanly involves me feeling triumphant, walking away with my chin up while Sloane crumbles behind me. That is not what I felt. I felt tired. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has finally, in public, been allowed to set it down. I also felt seen by a room full of strangers in a way I had not been seen at 18 by the people who were supposed to love me. The next few hours were complicated. Professionally speaking, Nathan's best man, a practical-seeming man named Derek, materialized quickly and began the project of damage control. Guests were guided back inside. Marianne Reed sat with her son in a quiet corner of the vineyard for a very long time. My parents found me twice. My mother approached me with the look of someone preparing a version of events. My father came with the look of someone who had heard the word why and was now trying to determine the cost. I was not cruel to them. I want that on record, because cruelty would have been easy and would have felt, briefly, like power. I told my mother quietly and without performance that I had not cut the family off, that the family had cut me off, and that I had 11 years of one-sided silence available as evidence if she would like to revisit the chronology. I told my father that I genuinely hoped he was well. Then I walked away and did not go back. The wedding, to my knowledge, did not proceed that evening as planned. Derek texted Nathan's cousin, who texted Meredith, who texted me at 11:47 that night with a string of messages I read from my hotel bed with something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite sadness, but contained elements of both. Nathan and Sloane had left separately. The venue had been paid for regardless. The cake had apparently eventually been cut by someone for the guests who remained, because 200 people had traveled and eaten salmon, and it seemed unkind to send them home without dessert. I appreciated that detail. The cake. Someone had thought to cut the cake. I drove back to Boston on Sunday. I stopped for coffee in a town whose name I did not catch, at a diner with vinyl stools and coffee that had been sitting too long. I sat there for 20 minutes alone with my cup and the Sunday quiet, thinking about the thing I had carried for 11 years, and what exactly I was supposed to do with it, now that I had set it down. Amara called before I reached the highway on-ramp. I told her what had happened, the terrace, Nathan's question, Marianne standing up, the one step backward. She listened without interrupting, which was her particular gift. When I finished, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about the clearance rack dress, the backyard laughing, 11 years of being spoken about in past tense, and the moment Nathan Reed looked at my father and asked, "Why?" with the simple, genuine bafflement of someone who had spent 2 years believing I was a miracle. "I feel like I can close a file," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's the most urgent answer I've ever heard." I laughed. It surprised me, the genuine, unguarded quality of it coming up from somewhere I had not expected. 3 months later, a card arrived at my office at Mass General, handwritten like the first one, in Nathan's handwriting, which I recognized. He thanked me, not for anything dramatic, not for showing up, not for the wedding, not for whatever cosmic machinery had placed us in the same vineyard that September afternoon. He thanked me for his brother, for 4 surgeries in 14 months, and for the careful, unglamorous work of putting something broken back together. He said Evan had gone back to work, had gotten engaged, and had apparently started teaching himself to make pasta from scratch, which seemed to Nathan like definitive proof of recovery. He wrote, "I don't know what my family told yours about you over the years, but I want you to know what we told ours. We told them you were extraordinary. We still do." I held the card for a while, then set it beside the first one in the drawer where I kept things I did not want to lose. Then I went back to work. I had surgery at 7 the next morning. A 23-year-old named Marcus, a warehouse worker from Dorchester, who had been caught in a machinery accident that had done serious damage to the left side of his face. He was terrified and angry, and he had a mother who sat in the waiting room in a plastic chair and would not leave. Not for food, not for coffee, not for the social worker who came twice to offer her things. Before I went in, I stopped in the hallway outside his room and stood there for a moment with the particular stillness I had developed over years of doing this. Not meditation, nothing so organized, just a moment of being present before the work demanded everything. Then I put on my gloves and went in. That is the job. You show up. You do the work. You help people look in mirrors again. My mother called twice in the month after the wedding. I did not answer either time. She left messages, careful, precisely worded messages that managed to express regret without conceding any specific wrongdoing, which was an impressive technical achievement and exactly what I would have expected. My father did not call. Meredith texted me a month after that to say she had run into my parents at a family gathering and that my mother had referred to the wedding as a difficult situation. Sloan was, according to the latest report, living in Cincinnati and had not, as far as Meredith knew, been in contact with Nathan since the night at the vineyard. I thought about that. The things Sloan had said, without meaning to, in front of 200 people. I didn't know Nathan knew her. Not a denial. Not an apology. A logistics failure. She had built a version of me and deployed it without checking whether it had been load tested against reality. And reality had, in the end, provided its own stress test. I did not call Sloan. I am not sure I ever will. Not because I am holding the wound open. I am genuinely not. I have done too much work on that particular scar to want to peel it back. But because forgiveness, the real kind, is not owed to someone just because time has passed and they got caught. It is something I give when I am ready, on my own terms, because it serves my healing rather than their absolution. Maybe someday, maybe not. What I know is this. I was 18 years old in a $14.99 clearance dress, standing in a backyard full of people eating food that was supposed to celebrate me, while the people who were supposed to be proudest of me made me the punchline instead. And I left, and I became someone. Not in spite of them, exactly. The clarity of grief is a real force, and I have used mine. Alongside that grief, with it as a kind of fuel burning off in the background of every long night in medical school, every surgery that went over by 4 hours, every patient I sat with in a recovery room at midnight because the fear was too big to leave them alone in, I became Dr. Hannah Whitaker, reconstructive surgeon, Boston. I help people look in mirrors again. And at a vineyard outside Columbus on a Saturday in late September, a man named Nathan Reed turned around at his own wedding and said my name across a room of 200 people, not to the family that had spent 11 years erasing me, but about me, in the voice you use when you are saying something true. And the cake had not even been cut yet. That is enough. That is more than enough.